punished for free speech? Brown University has decided to charge 41 students with trespassing, reportedly after they were arrested last week during a pro-Palestine protest for refusing to leave an administrative building after hours. Brown's decision to charge the students follows 20 students protesting Israel's invasion of Gaza, who were arrested also and charged with trespassing in November. Brown eventually dropped those charges after a Palestinian student at Brown, Hisham Awartini, along with 2 other Palestinian students were shot in Burlington, Vermont. Brown has seen several pro-Palestinian protests in recent weeks. Here's footage of protesters disrupting a vigil for the 3 Palestinian students who were shot.
Sadly, we can't control what happens around the world and across the country. We're powerless to do everything we'd like to do. But there's so much that we are doing and continue to do. A vigil for your friend, our student.
Joining us now to discuss this story as well as the wave of protests across the nation are Isabella Garo and Carla Humphris, 2 organizers with Brown Divest who participated in the protest, which led to trespassing charges. Welcome to both of you. So I want to start with just tell us what happened that day, the day where 41 students are now having charges pressed against them. I'm also intensely curious as to why Christina Paxson decided to show up to the vigil at all. But let's start with you, Bella. Why don't you tell us why you all decided to demonstrate that day and gather and what happened?
I think the answer is twofold in that we each have our own individual motivations for being there, as well as our collective motivations and goals for the sit-in. Collectively, we felt that we could not stand by as our university knowingly and willingly invested in companies that were facilitating the genocide in Gaza. And we all felt that it was a moral imperative and our personal responsibility to compel our university and use our position as Brown University students to ask them and demand that they divest from these companies. And then on a personal level, just being Latina and, coming from a community and from a people who've experienced so much oppression, I felt that it was my personal responsibility to stand up against oppression when I see it, even if it's against a community that isn't necessarily my own.
And let's bring you in, Carla.
Yeah.
Why don't you tell us a little bit about your perspective of what happened that day and why you all decided to show up?
So I personally was not, in fact, one of the students who sat in and was arrested, but I helped organize and was outside the building on the day of the sit-in. So a little bit of what happened that day is, so there was a rally held in sort of for justice for our classmate Hisham, who was shot in late November. And during that time, it surfaced that 41 students were sitting inside University Hall with the intention of demanding that Christina Paxson forward the ACRIT report, which was this report compiled in 2020 recommending that Brown divest its endowment from a set of specific companies facilitating the genocide in Gaza. The students said that they would stay inside the building until their demand was met. Christina Paxson spoke with them in the morning and later delivered them a letter essentially refusing their demand. And then at 5 o'clock, the police showed up. I mean, Bella can speak to this more than I can. But from an outside the building perspective, hundreds of students gathered outside, and over the next sort of 3 or 4 hours, we were outside singing and chanting in support of the students who were arrested inside the building, processed in there, and then released one by one over a long span of time, in which us on the outside were very sort of confused and bewildered as to why this was happening, why it was happening in such a way, and outraged, of course, that 41 of our classmates were being arrested for peaceful protest at a school with a rich history of student protest that is in fact celebrated officially by the university.
So it
I'm
looks
sure
like
Bella can speak more to it.
Yeah, so Bella, a follow-up question for you. It looks like Brown does have a policy that you're not supposed to be in some of these buildings after hours. The university claims that they gave you multiple warnings to leave the building prior to the arrest. So I'm having a hard time squaring. I mean, obviously the protesters outside the building weren't arrested and the ones inside were. So this was a trespassing issue, not a speech issue from what I'm looking at. Is it true that the university warned you that they would arrest you if you didn't leave?
Yes, there were members of the administration that spoke to us and notified us that if we remained in the building past closing time, which was 5 p.m., that we may be subject to arrest. We responded by telling them that we did not intend to leave the building until Christina Paxson agreed to bring the 2020 ACRIP report to the next corporation meeting in February and advocate for its voting and passage in the corporation. And they responded by choosing to arrest us instead.
So I'm curious, both of you, your perspective on how the issue of Israel-Palestine has perhaps been handled differently by Brown University compared to other issues. I've been at the university when peaceful protests have been had before, even those, that violate official code of conduct of Brown University. It's a deliberate decision that they want to call in Providence police and have students arrested. Can you just speak to how maybe, if at all, they're handling the issue of Israel-Palestine different than other issues where students have protested? Let's start with you, Carla.
So in terms of the actual protest, I think that reactions to protests have varied over time. But one thing that I think is very clearly an exception is Brown's choice to not even consider divesting and to say that divestment, and our president to regularly invalidate the efficacy and need for divestment and the role of divestment in the university's ethics, when Brown University has previously divested 5 separate times, beginning with South African apartheid, including the Darfur genocide in South Sudan, and most recently in 2020 from fossil fuels. Each of these times it has recognized that its investments have, divesting has had or impact on the social harm done by these things, and the fact that Brown University has divested from genocides throughout the world previously and is choosing not to here feels like a very pointed exception, and not only is not choosing not to divest, but is not even voting on it in the first place.
What else are you all prepared to do in the future if Brown continues to not divest? Will you be prepared to do another sit-in, face arrest again? What are some of the ways that you intend to try to hold them to your demands?
Well, in terms of specific actions, I can't speak to that. We don't know. But one thing I can say is that as each sit-in has occurred, more and more students across the university have become engaged with the issue, partly because of the arrests highlighting the issue of Brown's investments, something that the majority of the student body were not necessarily as aware of as they now have become. And so the amount of people engaged in the movement has dramatically increased over the past months, and there is an escalation in support and action against the university, and I'm sure that that will become increasingly obvious and in protests going forward.
Would you both be prepared to perhaps transfer to another school and take away your tuition dollars as a means of protest?
I will say we have 1 semester left. We're both seniors, and most of us, our tuition has already been paid for the next semester. So personally, I don't even think it is like a plausible or a possible option for us to even transfer. But at the end of the day, this is not a problem that is specific to Brown University. There are many universities across the country that are invested in the genocide we are seeing in Gaza. And we still see that it is our moral imperative to compel Brown to divest. Us leaving Brown University's individuals would not necessarily compel them to change their ways. We do feel it is our protests and us bringing this issue to the university's attention is the most feasible way of achieving divestment. And so I think that's where our efforts will lie moving forward.
Okay, Bella
I
and
think we
Carla.
have more.
Thank you.
Oh, I was just going to say.
We're out of
Sorry.
time, but thank you so much for joining us on Rising.
Of course, thank you for having us.
Thank you.